Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Melanin Margin, the weekly chat show where conversations about race are never off the table. We're your hosts, Quaviondre Williams.
And Daquon Wilson.
So let's get into this week's conversation. What's hot on the table this week?
True crime and serial killer docuseries have made a resurgence recently with Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story created by Ryan Murphy and Ian Brennan, which has been the most recent controversial addition to the genre. Netflix and the series has received a litany of backlash for a multitude of reasons since the series dropped. Many have criticized the show for exploiting trauma, including some of the victims' family. Rita Isbell, whose brother Eroa Lindsay was murdered by Dahmer, told Insider Magazine, quote, "When I saw some of the show, it bothered me, especially when I saw myself, when I saw my name come across the screen and this lady saying verbatim exactly what I said. That's why it felt like reliving it all over again. It brought back all the emotions I was feeling back then," end quote. Isabel continues stating, quote, "I feel like Netflix should have asked if we mind or how we felt about making it. They didn't ask me anything. They just did it. I could even understand if they gave some of the money to the victims' children. If the show benefited them in some way, it wouldn't feel so harsh and careless. It's sad that they're just making money off of this tragedy. That's just greed," end quote. So, Andre, I wanted to ask you, do you think that true crime shows such as Monster romanticizes trauma and serial killers?
You know, true crime or serial killer movies and TV shows always rub me the wrong way. Like I've talked about this before on my TikTok, but I love a good villain just as much as the next person. But serial killers are not villains. Serial killers are real people who have brutally taken innocent lives. I have no interest in their backstories because it doesn't matter to me. As we've said before, countless times, your trauma may explain your actions, but it does not excuse them. There are many people who have been through horrible, brutal, torturous life experiences who are not out in the world doing unspeakable acts. Serial killers make a choice to do what they do over and over again. So I have no interest in sympathizing with them because they could have just as easily chosen not to become the monsters that they are. The only people who should ever be receiving your sympathy are the victims, period, full stop. But segueing back to the question, I think Hollywood as a whole romances true crime and serial killers, especially with the casting choices they make. Teen girls have been fawning over Ross Lynch since his Austin and Alley days, and Evan Peters has droves of fangirls who loved his work as the tortured bad guy in several seasons of the anthology series American Horror Story. And they were both cast as Jeffrey Dahmer. Then there was Zac Efron, a popular teen idol from the movie High School Musical, who was cast as Ted Bundy in Netflix's extremely wicked, shockingly evil and vile. And in all of these dramatized retellings, there was nudity and sexualization of each of these actors in their performances. This lets me know that Hollywood is fully aware that a certain demographic of people fetishize serial killers, and they lean into it with the hope of also bringing in the people who fetishize the actors with the promise of nudity. While I'm not questioning the talent of these actors, I just think that it's an interesting commonality that who they cast as serial killers also happens to be recognized heartthrobs. But I think that people are missing a lot in this conversation. It is the fact that these movies keep being made over and over and over and over again. People continue to want to dig their nails into why a killer kills, or let me clarify, why a white serial killer kills. Yet the voices of the victims they stole are left in the dust. The victims' families are still out there, and each time Hollywood does yet another film or TV show, they are re-traumatized all over again, just as we found out. And not just from seeing the body doubles of their loved ones brutalized all over again, but also, as we saw in Monster, their own testimonies and emotions taken on by an actor supposedly stepping into a character. The victims are not characters. Their families are not roles. They are real flesh and blood people who are being tormented over and over again. If a film or TV show about serial killers was to be done, it should only be through a documentary lens, with a focus on the victims and with their approval. Moreover, any family members whose likeness or testimonies are used in these documentaries should be compensated handsomely. But Daquon, I want to pass it back to you. I mean, do you think that serial killers and true crime are romanticized?
Absolutely. I think that there comes this icky feeling when you have all of these different docu-series and true crime films about serial killers because, like you said, there are real people implied in these cases. It would be one thing if this was some fictional account of a serial killer. Then you can characterize the, person as much as you want to because at the end of the day, it's a character. But when you deal with something like the Jeffrey Dahmer story, you are dealing with him as a person as well as the people he murdered and their families. And I think that one of the biggest problems in this kind of genre is that so often they censor that serial killer. It's all about Jeffrey Dahmer. Yes, you get some of the victims, their backstories, whatever, but it's really censoring Jeffrey Dahmer, humanizing him. And I think that's where the problem comes because then you have people being like, oh, well, like he went through this trauma and I relate to this. And you're humanizing a literal monster. So it's one of these things where I think that in general, Hollywood does this exorbitant job at romanticizing these serial killers. And even if it's not intentional, even if we say they're just trying to tell the story that they want to tell, they know how serial killers are reacted to by so many fans. All of the true crime podcasts and everything like that, where they literally go in and do all of these different deep dives on these serial killers. It creates a loud voice for them and it humanizes them more than the actual victims they killed. If you wanted to do something about the Jeffrey Dahmer story, you should have talked to the victims. You should have talked to the victims' families. You should have done something to make sure that you are not censoring Jeffrey Dahmer, but censoring the victims and humanizing the victims because often they are just a piece of meat. Yes, they were killed, they were a person that was killed, but that's all that they did. That's their legacy, quote unquote, in these films, is that they died. They were a piece of meat that died. And that's really sad to think about. And it's like Isabel said, it's really greedy to profit off of trauma and violence, especially when it comes to a community that you don't belong to. Because let's be honest, one of the reasons why this Jeffrey Dahmer thing is so big is because so many of his victims were Black queer people, and that the white audience that Hollywood appeals to doesn't care about seeing Black queer people get killed on camera because they're here for the white protagonist of the story, quote unquote.
Yeah, I agree. And another thing I find interesting about this, and I hate that I even have to bring this up again, but some of the same people who are empathizing with serial killers are the same people who were apparently so traumatized by Will Smith slapping Chris Rock at the Oscars and still want him put under the jail. Like, these people have more empathy and understanding for a serial killer who brutally raped, molested, and ingested humans than for a Black man slapping another Black man for disrespecting his wife. I mean, TikToker Samira Rahim explained this phenomenon the best in a video response she did to another TikToker who said that she felt nothing at seeing the deaths of the Black and brown people who died at Jeffrey Dahmer's hands because she watched a lot of true crime, but she started crying when Dahmer was killed. Samira goes on to say that this is just the American media, or this is how the American media handles race issues and crime. When it comes to white serial killers, we are taught from an early age to think of them as an anomaly, as something that just comes out of nowhere, as these misunderstood people who are outcasts from society. And she explains that this is the system of white supremacy at work. She concludes the video by saying that if you can see 16 Black and brown people killed and feel nothing, but the one time the white male who is enacting violence is held accountable for his actions, you feel you have to come in and save him, that's the system working. Certain people are just more susceptible to the systems at play than others. And I think that she is 100% correct. I mean, let's take the news, for example. When the media reports on Black and brown teens who get caught up in gang violence and kill people or rob stores, the media talks about them with an adult lens and focuses on the victims, often referring to the teens who are responsible as suspects. No one discusses the positions those teens were put in by the family abuse, poor living conditions, or even mental health concerns. However, when school shootings happen by white teens, even as old as 18, many news stations still refer to them as kids and spend a segment talking about the shooter's whole life story and actually puts the victim stories as an afterthought. And it doesn't stop there. I mean, when we look at the insurrection at the Capitol versus the Black Lives Matter protesters and the reports on missing white children versus missing BIPOC children, I mean, this is because despite all the progress that we've made, white society still doesn't value BIPOC life in the same way they do theirs. More than that, when white serial killers specifically target Black and brown people, it clouds the perspective of the demographic of people who romanticize them even further. I think that's another contributing factor as to why many of the white gays and the straight white women were so enamored with the Dahmer series. They couldn't see themselves in his victims, so they identify with him. That's why often you'll see comments from white people saying things like, quote, "This could have been any of us." And in the words of Samira Rahim, nah, this could have been any of y'all. Like, mental illness can lead someone to doing bad things, but mental illness does not equal serial killer. In an article written on BBC News, neuroscientist James Fallon accidentally discovered he was a psychopath after studying his own brain scans. When going through the scans, he noticed similarities between his own brain scan and those of the murderers he had been examining. Professor Fallon said, quote, you can't tell just by looking at the scans or genetics whether or not a person is a murderer or a psychopath, but you can see that they are going to have tendencies for certain traits that are consistent with that. He added, quote, it's not a death sentence, the biology, but it will give you some high potential for these things. So the genes are loading the gun and making someone vulnerable to becoming a psychopath. And what that says is that even with all the pieces to make someone a serial killer, they still can choose not to be. But Daquon, I think this brings up an interesting question. Why do you think that there has been such an obsession with true crime recently?
I think that it really comes down to a lot of people want to have trauma, quote unquote. They want to feel something that's happening to them. And I think it really shines when you listen to some of these true crime documentaries and you literally have people kind of reenacting in their heads, like, if this was me, I would do this, this, and that. And they're putting themselves in the shoes of the victims in the sense that, like, they have this know about to be like, oh, well, in this situation, I would do this, this, and that. Or I wish something like this would happen to me because I've done all of this reading. I know so much. I know how to handle this situation. And it's like, no. When something like this happens, you don't know that you're about to be the victim in some type of documentary. You don't actually know what's really going on until it already happened. And I also think that, it's kind of ironic that people are like, I felt nothing at these people being killed, but when Dahmer died, I felt something, because it's like, that could be your ancestors talking, who killed enslaved Black people and also ate them. But that's a conversation for a different day. But I think
Exactly.
that, like you said, there's this interesting kind of aspect to this where they have this connection to the serial killers in these documentaries, because they don't relate to the Black and brown people who
Yeah.
are being victimized and are the subjects of violence.
Yeah, I fully agree. Um, I think that there is something to be said about the way that people try to connect to these serial killers to try to find out what could possibly be the reason. I mean, it had to be something. And I think that sometimes what people don't realize is that a lot of bad people don't always have horrible backstories. Yes, there are some who do. Yes, there are some people who have been through some terrible things, but there are some who are just evil for the sake of being evil. I mean, that Joker quote really comes to mind where it's like some people just kind of want to watch the world burn. You know what I'm saying? And I think that people kind of, want to find just any kind of semblance of connecting, any kind of semblance to humanize these people in order to try to explain why they did what they did. And sometimes there is no explanation to madness. It's just evil for the sake of being evil. In an article from Black Enterprise, we learned that admissions experts Timothy L. Fields and Shareem Herndon Brown are teaming up to start conversation about the college admissions landscape for Black families. In their new book titled The Black Family's Guide to College Admissions, the two address, quote, the needs and inequities of Black families in the college application process, specifically those that are often ignored by school counselors or other resources, end quote. Fields, who serves as a senior associate dean of admissions at Emory University, and Herndon Brown, who founded the independent admissions consulting company Strategic Admissions LLC, hope that the book will, quote, act as a resource shining a light on everything from the current social justice movement and the cultural and educational credibility of historically Black colleges and universities to financial aid and athletic recruitment, and is also for school counselors and educators who are seeking more insight with the goal of amplifying diversity, equity, and inclusivity. In an interview, Fields stated, quote, we are not looking to change school counseling, as we feel most do a pretty excellent job, but rather provide a resource to help educators and families better support students in this process and understand their options. So, Daquon, what was your experience with college admissions?
I think we talked about this a little bit on this podcast before, but college admission season was one of the most stressful periods of my life. It was a wild journey for me because I didn't have a lot of knowledge about it going in, and I had to learn along the way. My parents didn't go off to a 4-year college. And my brothers did go to college. My older brothers did go to college, but they went to colleges in state, and the process to getting into those colleges were a lot different than the process of the colleges that I was applying to. So it felt like I was diving headfirst into the water and have no type of flotation device to help me out. And it was exacerbated because even as I was like trying to get these applications done and do this and that to like make sure I have a good application, I also had to spend so much time being a guidance counselor, because our guidance counselor, had to deal with a lot of different things that she didn't necessarily have time to focus on me with my applications. And so there'll be times I would be in her office just like trying to get an application done, which she didn't know how to do, and I had to walk her through how to do it. And then another student would come in and need something, and it just became a process that was so long and laborious that it was like, I felt like, okay, I have to go and learn all of these different things so that I know everything I can about the college admission process. And like, I literally had people who were also at my school coming to me asking me about college things instead of our guidance counselor. So it was really a struggle. And I think that that is kind of how they talked about one of the challenges for equity and inclusion in the college admissions process is a lot of times, you know, when you talk about like Black and brown schools and, you know, lower income schools, they are either underfunded or understaffed, or they don't necessarily have all the resources in place to make that college application process easy for students. So I was really trying to keep my head up and to see that I didn't really know what was going on.
Yeah, I think for me, my process was absolutely horrendous. I think that when you step into college, you are expected to figure it all out and fast. I mean, if you're lucky, someone in your household can help guide you and show you the way, you know, the ins and outs, the do's and don'ts. However, not all of us are lucky enough to have that type of assistance available. I mean, many of the mistakes I made were because I didn't really have much guidance about how to avoid them. I think one of the biggest lies you're told growing up is that if you go to school, you know, with straight A's, you will get a full ride scholarship to college immediately. And I fully believe that growing up, so much so that I spent, you know, much of my early years cramped up in the room, you know, studying consistently, trying to make, you know, and maintain my 4.0 GPA. And while straight A's definitely can widen your range of scholarships to apply to, most of them only kind of require a 3.0 or better to qualify. Another thing they don't tell you is that many of the full ride scholarships require you to have been a part of some extracurricular activities or have done several hours of volunteer work. Not to mention the fact that just about every single one of them requires you to have top tier level essay writing skills. So if you hate writing, these scholarships say, prepare to be sick of me. There's also the college admissions fees, out of state versus in-state tuition, room and board, technical versus four-year institutions. I mean, it just goes on and on. I mean, one of the most trying aspects of admission, for me at least, wasn't the waiting or rejection or acceptance. It was the trying to get settled in, you know, trying to figure out what classes I needed to start with, learning, you know, who was the good or bad professors were, and being vigilant about the add or drop period. I mean, understanding my class schedules and how to work around it with my job. I mean, and let's say that you were lucky enough to get scholarships. Do not expect financial aid to explain any of it to you, because they're not really financial aid. They're just, you know, the school finance office. Many of them aren't aiding you in shit, and they do not give a fuck about you at all, because they've got hundreds of other students to get situated in addition to you. If there is any advice I could give, once you get a scholarship or qualify for something automatically based on your income, ask for a copy of the guidelines of that scholarship, because you don't know what they require for you to continue receiving it, and they will take it away from you and snatch it back with no availability to get it back. And then there's the refund process. See, I thought that I had to spend all the money I had from my bookstore allowance in the school store, or it would just go away. No one explained to me that for some scholarships, the excess is refunded back to you. And thank God I figured that one out pretty quickly. So let's say you've gone through all of that. You think that you're done until that first day of class. And I would tell anyone that's about to go to college to wait until the first day of class before buying your books, because way too many professors tell you that you don't need it on the first day. But if you're a planner like I am, and you just want to give and want to have these books just in case, just be very careful, because many of the books are available online or, you know, in person for renting, or even better, your professor just wants you to purchase the lab code because it gives you a free online copy of the textbook, oftentimes at a cheaper rate. But if you buy it from the bookstore and it's just in one of those 3-ring binder packets, do not break the seal until you know for a fact that your class requires the book. Most school bookstores do not offer a refund for those 3-ring binder versions of the textbook once the seal is broken. And there are so many other little tidbits that I wish I knew before going to college. But Daquon, what is some advice that you wish you knew back then?
I think, like you said, financial aid is not financial aid. They are just finance. Because there would be times when I'm like, how is this helping me? So one thing that I had to learn quickly in college in terms of like the financial aid process was that there are a lot of colleges that will bloat your financial aid package with all types of the loans. And I literally had a situation where I was talking to my financial aid officer, and you know, there was like scholarships that I didn't get that I needed to like get taken off of my financial aid package so that it reflected the scholarships that I did get. And when I noticed that change happened, it was like, okay, you know, these grants went down, these, you know, things went down, but the loans went up. And I was like, so why are you giving me more loans instead of just like leaving the grants that you gave me that are supposed to be for financial need alone? And it was like, oh, this is how I know this is a scam. Like financial aid will really be out there, and you try to call them and you can't get an answer. And like somebody's always out to lunch.
Yeah,
they're out to lunch from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. You got to catch them at 9 a.m. You got to catch them at like 4:30 p.m. if you're lucky. But I also think that really understanding not only where your classes are, but how far it is to get from one class to another. You got to do that walk at least 1 or 2 times before you even have your first day of class. Because there have been so many times my freshman year where I was like, oh, I can make this walk. First day of class happens, I'm like, never again. Immediately drop that class because it's not happening every single day. I'm walking into class, huffing and puffing up the stairs, sweating, because I also went to college in Georgia. That Georgia heat, that first day during the summer ain't nothing to play with. So really take your time to learn about your financial aid office, the school's finance department. Learn about where your classes are, their locations, your professors. And one of the biggest things that I learned is like, there are some professors who are the realist, and you need to find them and take as many classes with them as possible. Because I have had professors where I would go to office hours and they'd literally be like, oh, you need help with this essay? Here's this book. Here's this book. Like, they're literally giving me books to read that's perfect for the essay. They're giving me all different types of advice and talking me through, you know, certain articles or things to research that would help me. And so go to those office hours. Like, I'm an introvert. I don't like talking to people, but I promise you, take that time to go talk to your professors and get to know the ones who are really on your side, because they will definitely help you out.
Yeah, and I think that one of the best tools I had was going to rate my professor. I was my first semester, I fucked up bad because I was like, who the fuck is all these people? They was just not giving. I mean, I made it through, but I was like, this is just not it. And I think that with rate my professor, you know, it's a fine line you got to walk with it, because it's like there's some people who are just mad because they didn't do shit in the class and then you get an A automatically. So you kind of got to work your way through it. But I always try to look for the ones that are at least 4 stars or 3 to 4 stars or better, and like look and read the fucking reviews all the way through, because you can kind of see and kind of judge, okay, this person's really good, this person is kind of whatever, because you'd be surprised at how many 1-star professors earn that 1 star. And so I think that, and another thing that I think is a really, really big one is realizing, unfortunately, when you go to college, you really are on your own. like as far as where everything goes, unless you have a really good, family support system, or like you said, you had parents who went to those universities and stuff like that who know the ins and outs. Because I think that one of the hardest things that I had to the biggest, shots for me was that there was nobody who was, working with you to make sure you got what you needed, or that you had all the things that you needed. So there was sometimes where I would check, my refund balance, and I'm kind of like, wait a minute, something is wrong here. My money's in, and I owe y'all something. And I would have to go to the financial aid office and like, oh yeah, you're missing a tax return from 2015 or some weird ass shit of the tax ABA form or some shit that I was like, why nobody told me? They were kind of like, I don't know, shit. They might have sent you an email or something, and it was very kind of nonchalant. Huh?
They would be like, that's on you.
That's on you. And it's like, you don't even realize it because they don't send you information. They don't send you emails. They don't like send you, hey, just so you know, this is coming up. You don't get those kind of things that you do in high school or middle school or whatever, like where they were, giving you, hey, this is the date, this is due, this is what you're going to need for this and that and the fourth. A lot of these scholarships and stuff, even when you get them, you still have to go back and recheck to make sure, okay, I got this, I got that, I got this, I got that. Do you need anything else? Are you sure I have everything for this? Okay. And then going with the professors too, I think one of the biggest things that was a big culture shock for me was the fact that in TV shows and movies and shit, they be rolling the class at any time, skipping all the fucking time. Bitch, you missed that class more than 4 times if you want to. Oh, 3, I think it's 3. Oh, you're done. You withdrawn. Dropped. Gone. Here we go. Withdrawal fails sometimes too if the professor's being real petty. So like I was like, oh damn, so I can't just roll up in when I want to, and they do late. They take attendance. They mark you late and shit. If when you was in high school, if you going to college now, understand it, have that same mindset of I need to be on class on time. I need to not miss as many days as possible, because some colleges only have, what is it called? I think like 4 a certain amount of unexcused absences, and after that you're done. Like you're done. So it's
right, and some don't even differentiate. It's you have 4 absences, excused or unexcused. Period.
Exactly.
In those classes, you can't play with your attendance.
Or even with some of the professors that I've met who have been, there was one professor, a theater professor, who was like, when we took one of the girls, her grandfather had passed away, and she was like, I can't make it to the final exam. So, I told him that I need to retake can you tell him that I need to retake my exam? And so I told the professor, I was like, hey, X, Y, and Z just texted me. She said her grandfather that's going to be here for the exam. And he was like, oh, well, I don't do retakes. Sir, what? He was like, I don't do. She had to go to the dean to get him to give her a retake. And I was like, yeah, some of these teachers ain't shit. Like some of these professors ain't shit.
Right. If there's also, specifically to my Black people who go to PWIs, predominantly white institutions, let me tell you the best advice I ever gotten. A closed mouth don't get fed. You need to be able to advocate for yourself in a lot of these situations, because you're not going to have an advocate. So in that situation, like the student who's had, their parent or grandparent or whatever, your relative literally died and you had to miss, you need to be able to advocate for yourself to that professor. If they don't do nothing about it, take it to that department head. If they don't do nothing about it, take it to the dean. You need to be able to advocate for yourself, because there was been so many situations throughout my time in college where it was just like, damn, like, is there something wrong with me? Like, am I just like missing out? Like, am I the stupid one? And
No.
like, no.
Daquon.
Listen, a lot of these systems have not been made with you in mind. And so you got to make sure that you're top of mind for all of these different administrators and professors and faculty members who are navigating these systems. You need to make sure, even if this institution didn't have you in mind, you are going to be top of mind for everybody and advocate for yourself.
Bitch, you better say that. You better say it.
British-Nigerian actor John Boyega recently went on The Breakfast Club to promote the new movie he's starring in, The Woman King. During the interview, host Charlemagne the God asked Boyega about his dating preferences, to which Boyega responded, quote, "It's just a preference, but I like my women Black. It's just that Black women are fine as hell. Melanin levels gotta be over 75%. thickness got to be there, style got to be there. We got to laugh at the same jokes. We got to bump the same music. There's just got to be a flow, end quote. However, after clips of this interview started circling around the internet, people became split on Boyega's comments. Some felt as though the comments created a double standard, such as one Twitter user who tweeted, quotes, "If a white actor said they only dated white women, many would not defend his right to have preferences. They would call him racist. Double standards are a problem," end quotes. However, others believe that there's nothing wrong with the comment, such as one person who said, quote, "A black man who unabashedly uplifts and loves the very beautiful thing that every dark-skinned woman has been teased, disrespected, or violated for at one point or another, that's a black king right there," end quotes. So, Andre, that begs the question, what are your thoughts on Boyega's comments?
First I wanted to respond to that comment that started with the whole, well, if a white actor said this, this is that classic reverse racism argument that white people love to jump at whenever black people say that they love other black people.
And the quote was said by a black woman, which also just adds.
Really?
Yes.
Oh my God. So that takes it to a whole nother level right there. Oh, not the self-hatred. But let me read this down as simply as I can. The reason why BIPOC people can say that they prefer to date people of their own race is not the same as white people saying they only want to date people of their own race is because of what, say it with me now, white supremacy. The standards of beauty have always centered around Eurocentric features. As a people, we've all been conditioned to believe that white is better, white is beautiful, and whiteness is the goal. Whiteness has never been diminished, stereotyped, and demeaned in the same structural level as people with BIPOC features have been. To be attracted to whiteness is simply a product of our society's conditioning. It's the standard. White men and women don't have to say that they'll only date white people because it is already understood that whiteness will automatically be in their dating pool, which is why when white women and white men date interracially, it's capitalized on in society as something intriguing or groundbreaking or taboo, as we've seen with the popularity of a lot of BIPOC people with white partners being celebrated online simply for being interracial, and why many TV shows, books, and film often have their BIPOC love interests being white or vice versa. The same is not true with BIPOC circles, specifically when it comes to the Black community. You see, colorism runs rampant in many communities of color, and in the Black community, many Black men uphold the systems of white supremacy by demeaning and disrespecting Black women, specifically darker skinned Black women at every chance they get. You know, some have built entire brands on boasting about how they exclusively date white women or non-Black women. And this is why hearing this statement come from a Black man is important, because too often it's the opposite. As far as the whole, it's just a preference thing, I'm really over the question as it pertains to race of a person, because it's always giving fetishization, which is something we've unpacked and talked about on this show a lot. But before we get into that, I want to ask you, Daquon, what are your thoughts about his comment?
I think I agree with you. I think that these comments, you know, there's always this situation where a Black man uplifts Black women and then people create a discourse about it because it's not, like you said, it's not seen as often. It's always people belittling Black women and, you know, like the commenter said, you know, disregarding Black women, violating Black women for having features that are not fit within this European standard of beauty. And so if a Black person wants to be with other Black people, that is completely different than when white people say that they want to be with only white people. And we also can see from his comments that he says that he just likes it. It's something that he likes. It's a preference. And I think that's really the key part of this comment, is that he's not belittling other people and other women. He's not saying, oh, well, like white women, no, never. Asian women, no. Because oftentimes when the reverse happens and white people are talking about their preferences, they call black women loud and ghetto and all of these different things. And they use their preference as a way to belittle other people. There was none of that in this statement, none of that I seen. So I think that it is a comment that should just be a comment. He has a preference. And I think, like you said, a lot of these conversations about preferences and the whole, oh, what's your racial preference and all of that, it's tired. Can we move on? Can we have some
Right?
deeper, nuanced conversations about love and relationships over just racial preferences?
I think there's a difference between a good preference and one that is problematic, but I think let's break down what a preference is in simple terms. You see, I prefer green apples over red apples, but I still eat red apples. But bringing it back to the situation, I don't think people were really hearing what he was saying about his preference. You see, the reason that he has a preference to Black women is because of the cultural connection he shares with them as a Black man. Blackness, unlike whiteness, is not just a race, it's a culture. Being white has no cultural significance other than race, but being Jewish or Irish or German or even Australian has cultural heritage. Hell, even religiously speaking, saying I prefer to date Christians or Wiccans has a cultural connection to it. Also, I think that there needs to be a level of introspection when it comes to deciding whether or not your preference is problematic. If it's based on arbitrary stereotypes or a fetish, then that is absolutely not okay. For instance, there are several Black men online who say that they only date white girls because they are submissive and that they aren't aggressive, as if all white women in the world fit into this category, and that is simply not true. I think that unproblematic preferences are those based on cultural connections or personality types. However, at the end of the day, you're grown ass people who can prefer and date whoever the fuck you want. All that we ask is that you keep the people who you don't prefer's name out your fucking mouths. Like,
Please.
Like, back to the apple analogy, even though I prefer green apples, you don't see me building my entire brand on telling people just how much I will never eat a red apple or how much I don't like them, because that would be a whole lot of energy wasted on something that I supposedly don't care about. There's so much nuance in this conversation, but Daquon, I want to ask you, like, what do you think is the difference between a good preference or a preference that is problematic?
I think, like you said, it comes down to the reasoning. In this comments, I see culture as being a reason. He's saying music and jokes and all of those different things. And it's like, sure, there are white people who listen to Black music, but when we talk about Black music, there is a cultural competency to said music. And therefore, if you're not within that culture, you're not going to be able to grasp the full scope of what's happening in that music. And so I know for me, like, I love to have deep conversations about things about culture, music, Black plays, Black writings. And I would love to have somebody who also can not only know about that type of stuff, but can really go deep within it and be able to pick up on those cultural competencies. And if you're not within that culture, you're not necessarily going to understand that. And so I think, like you said, it's just, there's this level of, exclusion that a lot of problematic preferences have.
Yeah.
The people who are like, I would never have a red apple. Red apples are disgusting. They do this and that, and they just do so much. And it's like, it's tiring. And I think that the whole entire conversation about preference
is tired.
It's tired. And it's really between you and the person that you're dating. I think one of
Exactly.
the most problematic things people have about their preference is that they gotta spout it everywhere.
Everywhere.
It doesn't need to be all over social media. Your entire internet personality is you talking about your preference. Like, I don't care about that. Like,
Nobody
if
gives a
you
fuck.
like somebody, you like them.
You
Just
know
go
what it
ahead and
gives?
like them.
You know what it gives, Daquon? It gives those podcasts that have been going around going like, so what do you like about cheese? Actually, I don't wash. I don't wash ever. I don't just unprompted giving, just I don't wash. I've actually only bathed twice a year. Like,
It's like, I didn't ask for that. I don't
nobody.
need to know that shit.
Don't
Like,
give a fuck.
keep that in the drafts. If you have to talk about your preference so much, film a TikTok and keep it in the drafts.
Exactly.
Now, the table is always hot with current events and social issues, but sometimes the heat can get a little intense. Let's turn the temp down, take a breather, and get into this week's topic cool down. Andre, what do you have for us?
So, Daquon, I want to ask you, how do you feel about wife guys or people who define themselves based on who they are dating?
Ugh.
Yeah. End of
No.
topic.
End of comment. The silence is my comment. No, I think that, I think that wife guys are just in general icky. It's like, you can love somebody, and I
Mhm.
love that you love somebody. But when
Great.
your entire personality is just being married to someone, it's giving you're not a whole person.
Mhm.
And I think that becomes a problem in a relationship, and it often manifests itself in different types of problems because if you're not a whole person and you don't feel whole, you think that, oh, your wife is the person that makes you complete. But then you start to realize, well, I still don't feel like a whole person. And then you start trying to find other things outside of that relationship to make you feel whole again. And that's where so many different problems can arise. We've seen it time and time before, but I'm not going to speak on specific issues because let's be real, I'm tired of seeing it on my timeline. So I'm not even going to say those names. But I think that in general, like, sure, you can love your wife or love your husband and, really love and embrace your relationship and be proud of your relationship. But I know for me, that's for the birds. That is
Yeah.
never going to be me. I'm never going to be that person to have my entire personality based on somebody that I'm dating or in a relationship with because no, y'all don't need to see all of that.
Yeah. I just want to say, like, if your whole personality is that you are married, dating, or have a partner, go to therapy because Molly, you in danger, girl. Like,
Go to
but
therapy.
the sad part, though, is that I can't really blame people who are like that because I think to some degree we were all in that mental headspace at one point or another. I mean, our society indoctrinates us as children with animated movies that taught us that a lot of our happily ever afters start when we find that special person. Then there are the rom-coms. The person tells their love interest that they're their better half, or like you said, they complete me. And the dozens upon dozens of breakup scenes where it shows that without the other person, they are just a shell of who they were. I mean, it's an incredibly toxic mindset that I understand because I had to unlearn and mature out of it too. I mean, there is no such thing as a better half because you should never go into a relationship without being a full person, like you said. I mean, you may move together as a unit, but you are not one being. You should each be able to stand on your own. But I think that this also stems from us not really understanding what healthy and unhealthy relationships look like. Um, what really helped me understand this was an article that my therapist recommended to me on a site called One Love. It's called 10 Signs of an Unhealthy and Healthy Relationship. So the 10 signs of an unhealthy relationship. Intensity, when someone expresses very extreme feelings and over the top behavior that feels overwhelming. Manipulation, sabotage, when someone purposefully ruins your reputation, achievements, or successes. Guilting, when someone makes you feel responsible for their actions or makes you feel like it's your job to keep them happy. Deflecting responsibility, possessiveness, isolation, belittling, volatility, when someone has a really strong, unpredictable reaction that makes you feel scared, confused, or intimidated, and betrayal. But the 10 signs of a healthy relationships are basically the inverse of that. First, the relationship starts at a comfortable pace. The relationship moves at a speed that feels enjoyable to each person. There's honesty, respect, kindness, and healthy conflict, openly and respectfully discussing issues and confronting disagreements non-judgmentally. There's trust, independence, where you have space to be yourself outside of the relationship. Equality, the relationship feels balanced and everyone puts in the same effort into the success of the relationship. Taking responsibility, owning your actions and words. And fun, you enjoy spending time together and bring out the best in each other. And I want to ask you, Daquon, what do you think about those descriptions of healthy and unhealthy relationships?
I think that they really shed a new light on this whole wife guy thing because thinking about the unhealthy signs of a unhealthy relationship, it really shows just how unhealthy being a wife guy is because
Yeah.
you start to think about those things and it's like, oh, it is kind of manipulative because you're doing all of this for your wife and showing how much you love them and X, Y, and Z. And if that same energy is not reciprocated by the wife or partner or whatever, then it makes it look like they're the bad spouse, that they don't
Yeah.
care about the relationship and can actually turn people on your partner and think that you're this good guy and like your partner doesn't give you the same energy and you deserve better, quote unquote. And that can really create this manipulative and toxic environments. And I also think that a lot of this also comes from not only how toxic relationships we see in the media and how they're portrayed of like your happily ever after has to start with finding love, but
Yeah.
also so often I feel like wife guys don't have a personality beforehand. They
Oh,
have that white bread syndrome of like they don't really have that much things that are unique about them.
you know what?
But seriously, they don't have a whole lot going on outside of their relationship. So when they get in that relationship, it becomes their personality because they need something to set them apart. Maybe everybody is like, likes the same things or, is pursuing the same career path, but you're the person with a wife. You're the person in a relationship. And so
Wow.
you hold on to that to have some type of individuality in a world where you grew up not being an individual, but just like everybody else. That white bread syndrome.
That is a word, Daquan. I didn't even think about it from that perspective. Like the idea that they come in not having anything or not having a personality or not knowing themselves. So when they find someone, they're like, oh, bitch, I am here now. I have a wife and kids, and my wife and me watch Netflix together every night, and she sleeps with me too. So it gives very that kind of energy. But like, yeah, I'm thinking about that now. Like there are a lot of guys like that or people that I've met whose entire lives surround around the person they're with because they aren't really, they don't have a personality of their own. And that's really sad. And I think that that's also going into like knowing yourself, before you step into a relationship, because the thing about knowing yourself is you don't just know the good. You don't just know what you bring to the table. You also know your baggage, your trauma, the triggers that you have, the faults that you have. And when you know these things in here and up here, when you get into a relationship or you get into a situation where you're meeting someone and you're trying to discover if this relationship will work, and they're like, oh no, you're doing this, you're not doing that, X, Y, and Z, you're able to say, hold on, I know myself. And you're not going to tell me that I'm something that I know that I'm not. I know where I fall short, and that is not one of the areas that I do. And so I think that happens a lot. And I think that even with the unhealthy relationships, the signs of that, you know, especially, I don't know about in Black households, but in a lot of Black films, I've noticed that there's this idea of intensity. Like, let's think about Empire is a really great example of this, you know, with Cookie and Lucius. Even though the relationship was incredibly toxic, there was this intensity, this passion, this fire that made it feel like, oh, this is what love is. Love is fighting. Love is anger. Love is rage. And it's like, no, that's not it. No, that's not what it actually is. That's not what it should be. So I think that oftentimes, you know, unpacking that possessiveness and also unpacking the unhealthy dynamics that you may have that you might not even know you have within yourself when you're starting to get into relationships. So understanding that you have a tendency to self-sabotage, you may have a tendency to be too intense, too fast, or you may have a tendency to be, you know, very possessive. Understanding those things will help you become a more rounded, more healthy partner. Now, so many children grow up never knowing the full scope of what their culture has contributed to society and history. So, Daquon, I think it's time for a change. Let's take a pause, rewind, and remind the world just how we did that. In an article on blackpast.org contributed by Devon White, we learned that Alexander Miles is the 19th century African-American inventor known best for patenting his design for improving the automatically opening and closing elevator doors. The patent was issued on October 11th, 1887. Before moving to Winona, Minnesota, Alexander Miles began exploring his passion for inventing, first by creating hair care products while working as a barber in Wisconsin. After Miles and his family settled in Duluth, Minnesota, he began operating a barbershop in the four-story St. Louis Hotel. By using his earnings to purchase a real estate office, Miles became the first African-American member of the Duluth Chamber of Commerce. In 1884, he erected a three-story brownstone building in Duluth, transforming the surrounding area into what he styled as Miles Block. Shortly after, he began developing his concept to improve the function of the elevator door. Despite John W. Meeker's patented invention of the first automatic elevator door system in 1874, many elevators still required the doors and the shaft to be manually opened and closed. Miles became concerned with the dangerous risks associated with elevators once he noticed a shaft door left open during a ride with his young daughter. Due to people forgetting to close the shaft doors before utilizing the elevator, there were many reported incidents of people falling into the shafts. Although Meeker received the patent first, it was Miles' innovation that made electric-powered elevator doors widely accepted around the world. Today, the influence of his patent is present in modern designs for elevator systems in which automatic doors are a standard feature. Miles was known to be the wealthiest African American in the Pacific Northwest region by the time of his death on May 7th, 1918. In 2007, he was inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame.
I just love a good Black inventor story.
Right? Like,
it's giving excellence.
As always.
As always, Black excellence. In a post from the Smithsonian National Postal Museum, we learn about Mary Fields, better known as Stagecoach Mary, who was the first African-American woman to carry mail on a star route for the United States Post Office Department. Mary was born into slavery, but after emancipation, she moved from West Virginia and went up the Mississippi River where she worked on steamboats. She eventually moved west where she mainly worked for St. Peter's Mission near Cascade, Montana. One major thing that Mary was also in charge of was the locating and delivery of supplies needed for the mission. In 1895, in her early 60s, Mary obtained a contract by the United States Post Office Department to be a star route carrier. Mary built a reputation of being fearless while working as a mail carrier. Mary's job was not only to deliver the mail, but also to protect the mail from bandits, thieves, wolves, and the weather as well. Mary gained her nickname Stagecoach Mary due to her use of a stagecoach as a method of transportation to deliver the mail. Mary Fields died on December 5th, 1914. After her death, the townspeople raised money to have her buried in a cemetery on a road she drove frequently that linked Cascade to the mission. Mary's funeral was said to be one of the largest in town.
Bitch, this is giving.
Black women.
This is giving.
Right. Your legacy is so that they give you the largest funeral. They raise the town raises money for your funeral. That's what you call impact.
They got like a short movie or a short film. I'm like, fuck that. We need a whole full feature movie. Like, what the fuck is this? I'm tired of seeing fucking slaves. We want to see some shit. We want to see some black people succeeding and fucking the game up. Like, damn.
Can we get a Stagecoach Mary film?
Right, and you didn't got to call it nothing. Stagecoach Mary. That's the title.
There you go.
Like, as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening, and keep the conversation going down in the comment box below. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. And if you're listening to us on our podcast, please rate and review on whatever platform you're using. You can also follow our podcast on Instagram and TikTok at the Melanin Margin for updates of new content.